evening, friends, and welcome to another gentle trip through the forgotten past. You're standing on the windswept tundra of southwestern Alaska in the year 1570, and the world feels wrong. The rivers that should be rushing with salmon are sluggish and half frozen. The glaciers that your grandparents said were distant white smudges on the horizon now loom close enough to cast shadows over your hunting grounds. The very air bites at your skin with a cold that seems to seep into your bones and refuse to leave. You're not just experiencing a bad winter, you're living through the opening act of what historians will later call the Little Ice Age. And honestly, you probably won't survive this if you don't adapt fast. This isn't your typical ice age, the kind that lasts tens of thousands of years and buries continents under mile-thick sheets of ice. No, this is something far more insidious, a climate hiccup that will stretch across 3 centuries and reshape human civilization in ways both subtle and catastrophic. You're witnessing the planet's temperature drop by just a few degrees, which sounds almost trivial until you realize that this small shift is enough to freeze the canals of Amsterdam, solid trigger widespread famine across Europe, and force entire populations to completely reinvent how they survive. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment below, letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Are you bundled up in a Minnesota winter, or maybe sweating through a summer night in Australia? I love hearing from you night owls and early birds alike. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're part of a small but resilient community that's about to become inadvertent pioneers in extreme weather survival. Your village of Nunalak sits strategically between 2 rivers, positioned perfectly for the salmon runs that have sustained your people for generations. But as you look around at the landscape, your ancestors knew everything feels subtly shifted, like someone has retuned the entire world to a colder, harsher frequency. The permafrost beneath your feet has become your unwitting ally in preserving this moment in time. Hundreds of years from now, archaeologists will marvel at how perfectly your daily life has been frozen in place. Every tool, every scrap of food, every piece of clothing preserved in an underground museum that nature itself created. They'll find over 100,000 artifacts from your community, making it the largest collection of pre-contact Yupik materials in the world. But right now, you're not thinking about future archaeologists. You're thinking about survival. The old ways of living are shifting beneath your feet as surely as the permafrost, and you're going to need every ounce of ingenuity your culture has developed over centuries of Arctic living. The Little Ice Age isn't just changing the weather, it's about to test whether human adaptability can triumph over a planet that seems determined to freeze you out of existence. You can feel it in the wind, smell it in the air, see it in the way the light hits the ice differently than it used to. The world is entering a long, cold sleep, and you're going to have to learn to dream in a new language of survival. Your hands are raw from cutting blocks of earth, but there's no time to rest. The traditional knowledge passed down through generations is crystal clear. When the world turns cold, you dig in literally. You're constructing what will become one of the most sophisticated cold weather dwellings ever developed, a sod house that's part bunker, part greenhouse, and entirely brilliant in its simplicity. The design seems almost laughably basic to modern eyes, essentially a rectangular pit dug into the ground lined with stones and covered with a framework of driftwood and whalebone. But you're not building for comfort. You're building for survival in a world where the temperature has dropped far enough to kill. The thick walls of layered sod and earth will insulate you from winds that can strip flesh from bone, while the semi-subterranean design takes advantage of the Earth's natural warmth. Even when the surface world is locked in permafrost a few feet down, the temperature remains relatively stable. Your community is positioning these homes with the precision of military engineers. Each house faces southeast to capture what little sunlight manages to penetrate the increasingly gloomy skies. The entrance tunnels are deliberately built below floor level, creating a cold trap that prevents frigid air from flowing directly into your living space. It's a design so effective that similar structures are still used in parts of the Arctic today, though most modern people would probably consider your accommodations somewhere between rustic and utterly terrifying. The social dynamics of your village are shifting as dramatically as the climate. Extended families are clustering together in these sod houses, sharing body heat and resources in ways that would have been unnecessary just a generation ago. Privacy becomes a luxury you can't afford when survival depends on collective warmth. You're sleeping in piles like puppies, and surprisingly nobody minds, because the alternative is freezing to death in your sleep. Historians still argue whether these architectural changes represent a sudden adaptation to the Little Ice Age or simply the natural evolution of existing building techniques. The archaeological evidence suggests your people were already skilled at cold weather construction, but the structures from this period show innovations that seem directly responsive to the harsher conditions. You're not just maintaining tradition, you're actively improving it under pressure. The permafrost that's preserving your village for future archaeologists is also creating daily challenges you never expected. Your ancestors could dig root cellars and storage pits without much trouble, but now the ground is frozen solid year-round. You're learning to work with this new reality using the permafrost as a natural refrigerator for food storage, while also having to heat your tools just to dig through it. Your village is becoming a laboratory for sustainable living in extreme conditions. The waste heat from your oil lamps and cooking fires is carefully managed to warm the interior without melting the permafrost that forms your foundation. You're pioneering techniques for ventilation that prevent carbon monoxide poisoning while still maintaining warmth, a balancing act that requires constant attention and adjustment. The psychological impact of living in these semi-underground dwellings is something no amount of historical research can fully capture. You're spending months at a time in spaces lit only by oil lamps, where the walls literally freeze if you don't maintain your fires. The claustrophobia would drive most modern people to madness, but you're adapting with the same pragmatic resilience that's kept your people alive in the Arctic for millennia. Outside your sod house, the landscape is transforming into something your grandparents wouldn't recognize. The rivers that once flowed freely for most of the year now freeze earlier and thaw later, creating a much shorter window for fishing and travel. The permafrost line is creeping deeper into the earth, affecting drainage patterns and making previously reliable water sources unreliable. Your architectural innovations are becoming a model for survival that other communities will adopt and adapt. Word travels through trade networks about the sophisticated cold weather dwellings being built in Nunalik, and you're inadvertently influencing construction techniques across the Arctic. You're not just surviving the Little Ice Age, you're writing the manual for how to live through it. The sun above your head is lying to you, and you can feel it in your bones. What should be a normal solar cycle has turned into something far more sinister, a cosmic dimming that's contributing to the frozen hell you're now calling home. You're living through what scientists will later identify as the Maunder minimum, a period when the sun's surface shows almost no sunspot activity, reducing the amount of solar radiation reaching Earth by just enough to tip the planet's climate into chaos. Standing outside your sod house on what should be a bright summer day, you notice the light feels different, thinner, somehow less substantial than the sunshine your elders remember from their youth. The sun still rises and sets, but its warmth seems to dissipate before it can penetrate the increasingly thick atmosphere. You're not imagining things. The star that powers your world has entered a quiet phase that happens roughly every few centuries, and you've drawn the cosmic short straw. But the sun's betrayal is just the opening act. Across the Pacific Mountains are exploding with a violence that will literally darken your skies. Volcanic eruptions in Japan and the Philippines are hurling millions of tons of ash and sulfur dioxide into the upper atmosphere, creating a high-altitude haze that filters out even more sunlight. You can't see these distant explosions, but you're living with their consequences: summers that barely qualify as warm and winters that stretch on like a punishment from the gods. The atmospheric chemistry above your head has become a perfect storm of cooling factors. Those volcanic particles are acting like a planetary sunscreen, reflecting solar radiation back into space before it can warm the surface. Combined with the reduced solar output, you're experiencing what amounts to a global dimming event. The irony isn't lost on climate scientists who study this period, while modern humans worry about global warming. Your generation is struggling with the opposite problem. Your people have always been skilled at reading natural signs, but the signals you're receiving now are contradictory and confusing. The traditional markers that told your ancestors when to hunt, when to fish, and when to migrate are all shifted. Birds are arriving at different times, ice is forming in unexpected patterns, and the very rhythms of nature that guided your survival strategies for centuries are suddenly unreliable. Historians still argue whether the volcanic eruptions were the primary driver of the Little Ice Age, or simply amplified cooling that was already underway. The timing is suspicious. Some major eruptions in 1815, 1783, and earlier ones throughout the 1600s all correlate with particularly harsh winters. But correlation isn't causation, and the climate system is far too complex for simple explanations. You're living through a perfect storm of cooling factors that scientists are still trying to fully understand. The North Atlantic Oscillation, a massive atmospheric pattern that normally brings relatively mild weather to your region, has been thrown completely out of balance. Ocean temperatures and wind patterns that should be predictable are now chaotic, creating weather systems that seem to defy all logic. You're experiencing summer blizzards winter thaws, and seasonal patterns that change from year to year with no apparent rhyme or reason. Your community's oral historians are working overtime to document these unprecedented changes. The stories and songs that preserved environmental knowledge for generations are being updated in real time as elders struggle to incorporate completely new phenomena into traditional frameworks. You're not just surviving climate change, you're actively rewriting the cultural encyclopedia of how weather works. The psychological impact of living under these darkened skies is something modern people can barely comprehend. Seasonal affective disorder becomes a community-wide phenomenon when the sun itself seems to have gone into hibernation. You're developing cultural practices, storytelling music, communal activities that help maintain morale during months of dim gray light that would drive most people to despair. Sleep patterns across your community are shifting as the reduced light affects everyone's circadian rhythms. Children are being born into a world where summer sunshine is a rare treat rather than a seasonal given. You're raising a generation that will consider perpetual twilight normal, and their adaptations to this dimmed world will become part of your cultural DNA. The cosmic forces arrayed against you seem almost biblical in their scope: a dimmed sun, exploding mountains, and disrupted ocean currents, all conspiring to freeze your world. Yet somehow, you're not just surviving, but finding ways to thrive in conditions that would challenge even modern technology. You're proving that human ingenuity can triumph over cosmic bad luck, even when the universe itself seems determined to freeze you out. Your hunting grounds have become a puzzle with missing pieces, and the caribou are the first to tell you that something fundamental has shifted in the world's operating system. These magnificent animals, whose migrations have followed the same ancient pathways for countless generations, are suddenly showing up in places they've never been and abandoning routes your people have depended on for survival. You're witnessing one of the most dramatic examples of how climate change ripples through an ecosystem, forcing every living thing to adapt or die. The caribou teeth you'll leave behind in your refuse piles will eventually tell scientists an incredible story through isotope analysis. These chemical signatures locked into the animal's dental records, like a biological passport, reveal that the herds you're hunting are using completely different breeding and calving grounds than modern caribou populations. It's as if the animals have collectively decided to rewrite their own genetic programming in response to the changing climate, abandoning traditional territories that no longer provide adequate resources. Your hunting parties are having to venture further from the village than ever before, following caribou trails that seem to lead nowhere and everywhere at once. The animals are moving in smaller groups, splitting up in ways that make no sense according to traditional knowledge. Some herds are arriving weeks earlier than expected, while others have simply vanished from areas where they've appeared reliably for generations. You're not just hunting animals, you're tracking the physical manifestation of climate chaos. The salmon runs that once filled your rivers with silver abundance are becoming increasingly unpredictable. Fish that should be flooding upstream in massive numbers are arriving in disappointing trickles, and the timing is all wrong. Your fish traps and weirs, positioned according to generations of accumulated wisdom, are catching empty water more often than actual fish. The cold water temperatures have disrupted the entire marine food chain, affecting everything from the microscopic organisms that salmon feed on to the timing of their spawning cycles. Your people have always been opportunistic hunters, but the Little Ice Age is forcing you to become even more adaptable. Seals, which have become increasingly important as other food sources become unreliable, are changing their behavior patterns too. They're hauling out on ice formations that didn't exist before diving in areas where the water temperature has shifted, and even their breeding cycles are showing signs of disruption. You're essentially learning to hunt entirely new versions of familiar animals. The relationship between predator and prey has become a complex dance of mutual adaptation. As you adjust your hunting strategies to accommodate changed animal behavior, the animals are simultaneously adapting to your new patterns. It's an evolutionary arms race, playing out in real time with survival as the ultimate prize. The caribou are becoming more wary, the salmon more elusive, and the seals more unpredictable, forcing your hunting techniques to evolve at a pace that would have been unimaginable in more stable times. Historians still argue whether these dramatic changes in animal behavior were primarily driven by climate factors or human hunting pressure. The archaeological evidence suggests that while your people were certainly skilled hunters, the scale of behavioral change in multiple species points to environmental factors as the primary driver. You're living through a period when the entire ecosystem is being reshuffled and every species is scrambling to find its new niche. Your community's traditional ecological knowledge is being stress tested in ways that would challenge even modern wildlife biologists. The elders, who should be the ultimate authorities on animal behavior, are finding that their decades of experience are suddenly less reliable. Prediction becomes nearly impossible when the fundamental rules of animal behavior are changing year by year. You're not just preserving traditional knowledge, you're actively creating new knowledge under extreme conditions. The tools you're crafting from caribou antlers and bones are becoming more sophisticated as the animals become harder to hunt. Your people are developing new techniques for tracking, new strategies for approach, and new ways of processing the animals once you've successfully hunted them. Innovation isn't just encouraged, it's mandatory for survival when your primary food sources are playing by completely different rules. The psychological impact of this hunting uncertainty extends far beyond simple food security. For a culture that has always prided itself on understanding and predicting animal behavior, the sudden unpredictability of your prey represents a fundamental challenge to your worldview. You're not just adapting your hunting techniques, you're rebuilding your entire relationship with the natural world, learning to thrive in an environment where the only constant is change itself. While you're mastering the art of survival in your frozen Alaskan village, thousands of miles away across the Atlantic, your European contemporaries are dying in ways that would make your harsh existence look like a luxury resort. The same Little Ice Age that's challenging your community is absolutely devastating civilizations that lack your Arctic survival skills, and the contrast couldn't be more stark or more instructive about the difference between adaptation and catastrophe. Picture this: wealthy merchants in Amsterdam are watching their primary transportation network, the intricate system of canals that connects their thriving city, freeze solid for months at a time. These aren't just inconvenient ice patches. We're talking about ice thick enough to support entire winter festivals, complete with ox roasts and market stalls. The Dutch masters of water management and maritime trade are suddenly cut off from the liquid highways that made their prosperity possible. Their response: panic prayer and a lot of very expensive firewood. The contrast with your situation is almost comical. While Dutch nobles are burning furniture to stay warm in their drafty stone castles, you're sleeping comfortably in your efficiently heated sod house using oil lamps that provide both light and warmth while consuming a fraction of the fuel. European aristocrats are literally freezing to death in their bedchambers while you're maintaining comfortable temperatures in structures that are essentially underground bunkers optimized for heat retention. European agriculture, which depends on predictable seasonal patterns and relatively stable temperatures, is collapsing under the weight of shortened growing seasons and unpredictable weather. Crops are failing across the continent as spring arrives later and winter comes earlier, creating a cascade of famine that will kill millions. The famous Year Without a Summer in 1816 will see snow falling in July across much of Europe, destroying harvests and triggering mass starvation. Your diversified hunting and fishing economy, meanwhile, continues to provide adequate nutrition even as individual food sources become less reliable. The European response to climate disaster reveals the vulnerability of specialized hierarchical societies. While your community can quickly adapt hunting strategies and food processing techniques, European feudal systems are too rigid to respond effectively to unprecedented challenges. Peasants can't just decide to start hunting different animals or move to more productive regions. They're bound to their land and their lords trapped in a system that prioritizes stability over adaptability. French wine regions are experiencing harvest failures that will reshape European drinking culture for centuries. The vineyards that produce the wines beloved by nobility are simply too cold to ripen grapes, properly forcing a shift toward hardier grains and stronger alcoholic beverages. Meanwhile, you're perfectly content with your fermented seal oil and whatever warming drinks your people have developed for Arctic conditions, completely unaffected by the collapse of European luxury markets. The Thames River in London is freezing solid regularly enough that frost fairs become a recurring cultural phenomenon. Londoners are literally holding carnivals on the ice, complete with printing presses, puppet shows, and food vendors, because the river that normally flows through their city has become a temporary street. It's a charming adaptation, but it also represents the complete disruption of river-based commerce that kept the city fed and supplied. Historians still argue whether European mortality rates during the Little Ice Age were primarily caused by direct cold exposure or by the secondary effects of crop failures and social breakdown. The evidence suggests that while cold weather certainly killed people, the real devastation came from the collapse of food systems that couldn't adapt quickly enough to changing conditions. Your people, accustomed to environmental uncertainty, maintained food security while European populations starved. The witch trials that sweep across Europe during this period are at least partially a response to the inexplicable climate disasters plaguing the continent. When crops fail repeatedly and weather patterns become chaotic, superstition fills the void left by inadequate scientific understanding. Communities that should be cooperating to survive are instead turning on each other, burning supposed witches who are blamed for the unnatural cold. Your community's spiritual practices, by contrast, emphasize harmony with natural forces rather than seeking someone to blame for natural disasters. European cities are experiencing unprecedented mortality rates as poor sanitation combines with weakened immune systems from malnutrition and cold exposure. The urban concentrations that normally provide economic advantages become death traps when heating fuel becomes scarce and food supplies become unreliable. Your scattered village communities, with their sustainable population sizes and direct access to natural resources, avoid the cascading failures that devastate European urban centers. The irony is palpable. The civilized European societies, with their advanced technologies, complex trade networks, and sophisticated political systems, are proving far more vulnerable to climate disruption than your supposedly primitive Arctic community. You're not just surviving the little ice age, you're demonstrating that resilience comes from adaptability, not complexity. Your dinner plate would horrify a modern nutritionist and absolutely fascinate a survival expert because you're eating literally everything that moves, swims, flies, or crawls within a 50-mile radius of your village. This isn't the desperate omnivory of starvation. This is calculated dietary diversity that's keeping your community healthy while European populations are dying from scurvy and malnutrition. You've turned eating into a strategic art form, and frankly, it's probably the most important survival skill you'll ever develop. The refuse piles outside your sod houses tell an incredible story of culinary adaptability. Archaeologists will eventually catalog bones from fish seals, walruses, caribou birds, and even small mammals that most people would consider inedible. You're not being picky about your protein sources, because pickiness is a luxury you can't afford when the climate is actively trying to kill you. Every calorie counts, and every nutrient could mean the difference between thriving and merely surviving another brutal winter. Your seal hunting techniques are reaching levels of sophistication that would impress modern marine biologists. You're not just clubbing seals on ice floes, you're developing complex strategies for hunting them in water, on land, and in the breathing holes they maintain through thick ice. Seal oil provides essential fats for both nutrition and fuel. Seal meat offers high-quality protein, and seal skins become everything from waterproof clothing to kayak coverings. One seal properly utilized can sustain a family for weeks while providing materials for essential tools and shelter. The birds in your diet represent an exercise in opportunistic hunting that borders on genius. You're taking everything from tiny songbirds to massive seabirds, adjusting your techniques seasonally as different species migrate through your region. Spring brings eggs that provide crucial vitamins after a long winter of preserved foods, while fall migrations offer opportunities to catch and dry birds for winter storage. You're essentially running a seasonal buffet where the menu changes based on whatever happens to be flying overhead. Your fishing strategies have evolved far beyond simple hook and line techniques. You're building elaborate fish traps, seasonal weirs, and even underwater structures designed to channel fish into areas where they can be harvested efficiently. The reduced salmon runs haven't eliminated fish from your diet. They've just forced you to become more creative about catching them. You're taking species that previous generations might have ignored developing new preservation techniques and maximizing the nutritional value of every fish that ends up in your nets. Marine mammals provide the foundation of your diet, but you're hunting them with a precision that demonstrates deep understanding of their behavior patterns. Walruses, despite their massive size and aggressive temperament, are becoming increasingly important as other food sources become less reliable. You're developing techniques for hunting these dangerous animals that require coordination, courage, and equipment that can handle creatures weighing several tons. It's like going to war with your dinner, and losing means your dinner eats you instead. Land mammals beyond caribou are contributing to your dietary diversity in ways that showcase your community's hunting expertise. Small mammals trapped during winter months, when larger game is scarce, provide essential protein and fats when stored food supplies run low. You're even utilizing animals that most cultures would consider too small to bother with, because in an environment where every calorie matters, no potential food source is too insignificant to ignore. Historians still argue whether this extreme dietary diversity was a traditional adaptation that predated the Little Ice Age or a specific response to the increased environmental uncertainty of the period. The archaeological evidence suggests that while your people were always opportunistic hunters, the Little Ice Age period shows an intensification of this strategy, with a broader range of species being utilized and more sophisticated processing techniques being developed. Your food preservation techniques are reaching levels of sophistication that would be impressive even by modern standards. You're smoking, drying, fermenting, and freezing foods using methods that maximize nutritional retention while preventing spoilage. The permafrost that's making construction difficult is simultaneously providing natural refrigeration that allows you to store processed foods for months. You're essentially running a pre-industrial food processing operation that could probably teach modern survivalists a few tricks. The seasonal timing of your hunting and fishing activities has become a complex dance choreographed around unpredictable weather patterns and changing animal behaviors. You're developing backup plans for your backup plans, maintaining multiple food procurement strategies simultaneously, so that the failure of any single approach doesn't threaten community survival. It's like playing dietary chess while blindfolded and with the rules changing every few moves. Your community's nutritional health during this period of climate stress is actually quite impressive compared to contemporary European populations. While Europeans are suffering from vitamin deficiencies and malnutrition-related diseases, your diversified diet is providing most of the essential nutrients needed for health. You're proving that eating everything might not be elegant, but it's definitely effective when the world is trying to starve you into extinction. You're living in a world where dead beetles, caribou teeth, and tree rings have become your most reliable news sources, delivering information about environmental changes with a precision that would make modern meteorologists jealous. Your ancestors always knew how to read natural signs, but the Little Ice Age is forcing you to become forensic scientists of the natural world, extracting survival-critical information from sources that most people would dismiss as meaningless debris. The beetles emerging from the permafrost around your village are tiny time capsules, their preserved bodies containing chemical signatures that tell the story of exactly how much colder your world has become. These insects, frozen at the moment of death, carry isotopic evidence that temperatures have dropped at least 1.2 degrees Celsius below what your grandparents experienced. That might sound like a trivial change until you realize it represents the difference between a harsh winter and a potential extinction event for your community. Your people have always been expert trackers, but now you're tracking time itself through the annual growth rings of trees scattered across the landscape. Each ring tells a story of that year's growing conditions: wide rings for good years, narrow rings for harsh ones, and sometimes missing rings altogether when conditions were too severe for any growth at all. The trees around your village are writing a biological diary of the Little Ice Age, and you're learning to read their wooden chronicles to predict what might be coming next. The caribou teeth in your refuse piles are becoming inadvertent data loggers, recording the chemical composition of the plants these animals ate throughout their lives. The isotopic signatures locked into their dental enamel reveal not just what they were eating, but where they were eating it, providing a map of their changed migration patterns that your hunters can use to predict where the herds might appear next. You're essentially conducting forensic archaeology on your own garbage to improve your hunting success. Ice cores from the glaciers that loom increasingly close to your village contain atmospheric records stretching back centuries, though you obviously don't have the technology to analyze them. What you can observe is the visible layering in glacier faces the different colors and textures that mark years of heavy snowfall versus years of ash-laden precipitation from distant volcanic eruptions. You're developing the ability to read geological time like a book, understanding how past events have shaped your current predicament. The marine shells scattered along your coastline are chemical archives of ocean conditions, their calcium carbonate structures preserving records of water temperature and acidity that reveal how the seas around your village are changing. Warmer waters leave different chemical signatures than cold ones, and you're learning to interpret these natural archives to understand whether the ocean changes you're observing represent temporary fluctuations or permanent shifts in marine ecosystems. Your community's oral historians are working to correlate traditional environmental knowledge with the new signs you're observing, creating a hybrid understanding that combines ancestral wisdom with real-time environmental monitoring. The stories passed down through generations are being updated with observations about unprecedented ice formations, unusual animal behaviors, and weather patterns that have no equivalent in traditional knowledge. You're essentially creating a new environmental science from scratch. Historians still argue whether indigenous communities like yours possessed sophisticated understanding of long-term climate patterns or simply developed effective short-term adaptation strategies. The evidence suggests that your people were capable of both maintaining traditional knowledge about environmental cycles while remaining flexible enough to respond to unprecedented changes. You're proving that environmental science doesn't require modern instruments, just careful observation and systematic thinking. The pollen preserved in lake sediments near your village contains records of vegetation changes that correspond to the climate shifts you're experiencing. Different plants produce distinctively shaped pollen grains, and the layered sediments in nearby lakes preserve a chronological record of which plants were dominant during different periods, You can't analyze these microscopic records directly, but you can observe the larger scale vegetation changes. They represent the retreat of certain plant communities and the expansion of others. Your people are developing increasingly sophisticated methods for correlating different natural indicators to build comprehensive pictures of environmental change. Bird migration timing, ice formation patterns, plant flowering schedules, and animal behavior changes are all being observed and compared to create a multifaceted understanding of how your ecosystem is shifting. You're essentially running a citizen science project using tools that evolution has provided. The archaeological deposits forming around your village will eventually provide scientists with one of the most detailed records of human adaptation to rapid climate change ever discovered. Every tool you discard, every bone you throw away, and every structure you abandon is contributing to a data set that will help future researchers understand how societies can successfully navigate environmental crisis. You're not just surviving climate change, you're documenting it for posterity. Your ability to extract meaningful information from natural sources is becoming a crucial survival skill that distinguishes successful communities from failed ones. While other populations are struggling to understand why their traditional environmental knowledge is no longer reliable, you're developing new forms of environmental literacy that allow you to adapt to unprecedented conditions. You're proving that the secret to surviving climate change lies not in resisting it, but in learning to read its signals more accurately than anyone else. The world is getting colder, food is becoming scarcer, and your neighbors are starting to look at your successful village with a combination of desperation and envy that makes your skin crawl. What began as climate stress is now transforming into something far more dangerous: human conflict, driven by resource competition and the kind of desperation that turns former allies into mortal enemies. You're about to discover that surviving the Little Ice Age isn't just about adapting to environmental challenges. It's about defending yourself against other humans who've decided that taking what you have is easier than learning to thrive in harsh conditions themselves. The archaeological evidence from Nunalik tells a brutal story that unfolds roughly between 1645 and 1675. Your village doesn't simply fade away due to environmental pressure or gradual abandonment. Instead, it ends violently with clear signs of warfare that suggest your community was either attacked or became embroiled in conflicts that ultimately led to its destruction. The carefully constructed sod houses that sheltered your people through decades of harsh winters become battlegrounds, and the refuse piles that preserved evidence of your dietary success also preserve evidence of your violent end. Your success at adapting to Little Ice Age conditions has made you a target. While other communities struggle with failed hunting seasons and depleted food stores, your diversified subsistence strategy continues to provide adequate nutrition. Word travels through regional trade networks about the village that's thriving while others starve, and that information attracts attention from groups who've decided that raiding is more efficient than adapting. You're learning the harsh lesson that competence in crisis situations can be as dangerous as it is beneficial. The climate stress affecting your region is creating a domino effect of social breakdown that extends far beyond your immediate area. Communities that traditionally maintained peaceful relationships are being forced into competition for dwindling resources. Hunting territories that were once shared or respected are becoming contested zones. Trade relationships that provided mutual benefit during good times are dissolving into suspicion and hostility when scarcity makes cooperation seem like a luxury no one can afford. Your people are forced to make increasingly difficult decisions about resource allocation and community defense. The time and energy that could be spent on hunting, fishing, and food processing must now be diverted to security measures. Weapons that were primarily tools for hunting are being redesigned for human conflict. The social structures that worked beautifully for environmental adaptation are being stress tested by the need to defend against human threats as well as natural ones. The psychology of prolonged crisis is taking its toll on neighboring communities in ways that make violence seem increasingly rational. When traditional survival strategies fail year after year, and when children are starving despite adults' best efforts, the moral calculations that normally prevent communities from attacking each other begin to break down. Desperation has a way of rewriting ethical frameworks, and you're witnessing the transformation of previously peaceful neighbors into potential threats. Historians still argue whether the conflicts that ended Nunalak were primarily caused by climate-related resource stress or by other social and political factors that coincidentally occurred during the Little Ice Age period. The timing suggests that environmental pressure played a significant role, but human conflict is complex and rarely has single causes. What's clear is that climate crisis and social violence became intertwined in ways that amplified both problems. Your community's defensive strategies reveal sophisticated thinking about security in an uncertain world. The sod houses that were designed for thermal efficiency are being modified with defensive features. Escape routes are being planned and maintained. Weapons caches are being distributed throughout the village. You're essentially militarizing your survival infrastructure while trying to maintain the social cohesion that makes survival possible in the first place. The regional trade networks that once provided economic stability are becoming conduits for information about which communities are vulnerable and which are well defended. The same communication systems that allowed sharing of resources and knowledge during good times now spread intelligence about potential targets for raids. You're discovering that connectedness, which was an advantage during peaceful periods, can become a liability when social trust breaks down. Your children are growing up in a world where constant vigilance is necessary for survival. The skills they're learning include not just traditional hunting and food processing techniques, but also combat training and defensive strategies. You're raising a generation that will be incredibly capable of surviving in hostile environments, but at the cost of the innocence and security that children in more stable times could take for granted. The violence that ultimately destroys your village represents the failure of human adaptability in the face of extreme stress. While your community successfully navigated the environmental challenges of the Little Ice Age, the social challenges proved insurmountable. Your story becomes a cautionary tale about how climate crisis can trigger cascading social failures that are even more devastating than the original environmental problems. The end of Nunalak isn't just the end of a village, it's the end of a successful experiment in climate adaptation destroyed not by environmental factors, but by the breakdown of social systems under pressure. You've proven that humans can adapt to dramatic climate change, but you've also demonstrated that adaptation requires not just technological and subsistence innovations, but also social institutions capable of maintaining cooperation under extreme stress. Your hands know the exact tension needed to split caribou antler along its grain, transforming what most people would consider skeletal waste into precision instruments that could mean the difference between survival and death. You're not just making tools, you're crafting the technological foundation of Little Ice Age civilization, creating equipment so perfectly adapted to extreme conditions that some designs haven't been improved upon even by modern manufacturing. Every scraper, needle harpoon point, and cutting implement emerging from your workshop represents thousands of years of accumulated knowledge refined under the ultimate pressure test. The caribou antlers that fill your refuse piles aren't discarded randomly. They're the byproducts of an incredibly sophisticated materials science operation that would impress modern engineers. Antler has properties that make it superior to metal in many cold weather applications. It doesn't conduct heat away from your hands like metal would. It's naturally flexible enough to absorb shock without breaking, and it can be shaped using simple tools while retaining incredible strength. You're working with a composite material that nature spent millions of years perfecting, and you're using it to create tools that perform better in Arctic conditions than anything Europeans are producing with their supposedly advanced metallurgy. Your needle-making process alone represents a level of precision manufacturing that requires both artistic skill and scientific understanding. Each needle must be perfectly smooth to avoid snagging delicate sinew thread, sharp enough to penetrate tough hide, and strong enough to withstand the repetitive stress of sewing thick winter garments. The bone and antler needles you're producing are so well crafted that they'll remain functional for decades, and some will still be sharp enough to use when archaeologists find them centuries later preserved in your permafrost storage system. The sealskin clothing emerging from your workshops represents textile engineering that's probably superior to anything being produced anywhere else in the world during this period. You're creating garments that are simultaneously waterproof, windproof, breathable, and insulating properties that modern outdoor gear companies spend millions of dollars trying to achieve. Your parkas, boots, and mittens are being designed by people who understand that a single flaw in construction could result in death from exposure, so every stitch and seam receives the attention that life or death equipment deserves. Your harpoon technology demonstrates mechanical engineering principles that wouldn't be formally codified by European scientists for another 2 centuries. The detachable heads, the precisely balanced throwing weights, the rope attachment systems, every component has been optimized through generations of trial and error testing under conditions where failure meant starvation. You're producing hunting equipment that's so effective it allows relatively small human beings to successfully kill marine mammals weighing several tons using nothing but precisely applied physics and flawless craftsmanship. The oil lamps that light and heat your sod houses represent energy technology that's both sustainable and incredibly efficient. These aren't simple containers with wicks. They're precisely engineered devices that control flame size, fuel consumption, and heat distribution with remarkable accuracy. The stone basins are carved to specific depths and shapes that optimize combustion, while the wicks are made from materials that burn cleanly without producing dangerous smoke. You're essentially operating miniature refineries that convert seal oil into light and heat with efficiency rates that would be respectable even by modern standards. Historians still argue whether the technological sophistication evident in Little Ice Age Arctic communities represents gradual evolution of existing techniques or rapid innovation driven by climate stress. The archaeological evidence suggests both processes were occurring simultaneously. Traditional technologies were being refined to higher levels of precision, while entirely new solutions were being developed for unprecedented challenges. You're living through a technological revolution that's being driven by necessity rather than leisure. Your kayak construction techniques demonstrate understanding of hydrodynamics, materials, science, and structural engineering that European shipbuilders wouldn't match for centuries. Those vessels are being built to specifications so precise that the finished boats will perform optimally in specific water conditions, respond predictably to particular paddling techniques, and remain stable in seas that would swamp larger European craft. You're essentially custom building watercraft, the way modern racing yacht designers create competition vessels, except your life depends on getting the calculations right. The composite bow technology you're developing combines materials in ways that maximize power while minimizing weight and bulk. Antler wood sinew and other organic materials are being laminated together using adhesives and binding techniques that create weapons with performance characteristics superior to much larger European crossbows. You're producing handheld artillery that can drive projectiles through thick hide at distances that give hunters decisive advantages over large and dangerous prey. Your food processing equipment represents chemical engineering applied to nutrition and preservation. The stone bowls, wooden containers, and specialized tools used for rendering oil smoking meat and fermenting foods are designed with precise understanding of how different materials affect food safety and nutritional value. You're operating what amounts to a pre-industrial food laboratory that produces preserved foods with shelf lives measured in years rather than weeks. The integration of all these technologies into a coherent survival system demonstrates systems thinking that's remarkably sophisticated. Every tool is designed to work with every other tool. Every technique supports multiple applications, and every process has built-in redundancies that prevent single points of failure from threatening community survival. You're not just making individual tools, you're creating a technological ecosystem that's optimized for thriving under the most challenging conditions Earth can provide. And honestly, it's so elegantly designed that it makes most modern survival gear look like amateur hour improvisation. The permafrost beneath your feet is already beginning its centuries-long job of preserving your story, capturing every detail of how human beings can not only survive, but actually thrive during one of the most challenging climate periods in recorded history. As you go about your daily routines, checking fish traps, repairing tools, tending oil lamps, you're unknowingly creating a time capsule that will eventually teach modern scientists more about climate adaptation than any textbook ever written. Your success isn't just keeping your community alive, it's providing a roadmap for how civilizations can navigate environmental crisis through ingenuity, flexibility, and sheer stubborn determination. Modern climate researchers studying your village have discovered something remarkable. While European populations were experiencing widespread mortality and social collapse. During the same period, your community maintained stable nutrition, developed innovative technologies, and actually expanded their cultural achievements. The artifacts emerging from Nunalek represent not just survival, but a flowering of human creativity under pressure. You're proving that crisis doesn't automatically lead to decline. Sometimes it sparks innovation that wouldn't have occurred during easier times. The lessons embedded in your community's success story are profoundly relevant to modern discussions about climate change adaptation. Your diversified subsistence strategy offers insights for communities facing uncertain food security. Your architectural innovations demonstrate principles of sustainable building that remain effective today. Your social organization shows how communities can maintain cooperation under stress. Most importantly, your example proves that rapid environmental change doesn't have to be catastrophic if humans are willing to adapt their behaviors and expectations quickly enough. Your technological achievements are teaching modern engineers about the possibilities of sustainable manufacturing using locally available materials. The tools and weapons you're creating perform as well as or better than mass-produced modern equivalents while having essentially zero environmental impact. Your manufacturing processes are entirely powered by renewable energy, produce no toxic waste, and use materials that are completely biodegradable. You're demonstrating industrial techniques that modern green technology companies are still trying to develop. The social innovations that allow your community to function effectively during prolonged crisis offer insights for modern societies facing similar challenges. Your resource sharing systems, conflict resolution mechanisms, and decision making processes are all optimized for maintaining group cohesion when individual survival depends on collective success. You're modeling forms of social organization that prioritize resilience over efficiency, cooperation over competition, and long-term sustainability over short-term advantage. Your relationship with the natural world represents an approach to environmental management that modern conservation biologists are still learning to appreciate. Rather than trying to control or dominate natural systems, you're learning to work within them, adapting your behaviors to match natural cycles and constraints. Your hunting and fishing practices are sustainable not because you're trying to be environmentally conscious, but because unsustainable practices would quickly lead to starvation. Historians still argue whether the success of communities like Nunalek during the Little Ice Age represents exceptional adaptation or simply the application of traditional knowledge that was already well suited to harsh conditions. The evidence suggests that both factors were important. Your people possessed cultural knowledge that provided a foundation for adaptation, but they also demonstrated remarkable creativity in developing new solutions for unprecedented challenges. The psychological resilience that allows your community to maintain morale and social cohesion during decades of harsh conditions offers insights for modern understanding of human response to prolonged stress. Your cultural practices, storytelling music, communal activities, spiritual ceremonies, serve functions that go far beyond entertainment, providing emotional support systems that help individuals cope with circumstances that would overwhelm most modern people. Your community's approach to risk management demonstrates sophisticated thinking about uncertainty and contingency planning. Rather than relying on single strategies or resources, you're maintaining multiple parallel systems that provide redundancy and flexibility. Your food procurement includes hunting, fishing, gathering, and trade. Your shelter systems include multiple building types optimized for different conditions. Your tool technologies use various materials and construction techniques. You're essentially building anti-fragility into every aspect of your survival infrastructure. The educational systems that transmit knowledge within your community are remarkably effective at preserving essential information while allowing for innovation and adaptation. Traditional knowledge is respected and maintained, but it's also continuously updated based on new observations and experiences. You're demonstrating how cultures can maintain continuity with the past while remaining responsive to changing conditions, a balance that many modern societies struggle to achieve. Your story is becoming a case study in successful climate adaptation that offers hope and practical guidance for communities facing environmental challenges today. The archaeological record of Nunalak demonstrates that human societies can survive and even thrive during periods of rapid climate change if they maintain flexibility, invest in appropriate technologies, and prioritize community resilience over individual advantage. You're not just surviving the Little Ice Age, you're writing the handbook for how civilizations can navigate environmental crisis successfully. The techniques and technologies you're developing will influence Arctic communities for centuries, with some of your innovations remaining essentially unchanged until the arrival of modern industrial materials. Your success proves that appropriate technology doesn't require complexity or massive resource inputs. It requires deep understanding of local conditions and careful optimization of simple solutions. You're demonstrating that the most effective responses to environmental challenges often involve working with natural systems rather than against them, using biological materials and processes that are already adapted to local conditions. As the permafrost slowly claims your village, preserving every detail of your remarkable adaptation to one of history's most challenging climate periods, you're creating a legacy that extends far beyond your own survival. Your story becomes proof that human ingenuity, properly applied, can triumph over almost any environmental challenge. In a world increasingly concerned about climate change and environmental uncertainty, your example offers both practical guidance and profound hope, evidence that our species possesses the creativity and resilience necessary to adapt to whatever changes the future might bring. The last oil lamp burns low in your sod house as another Arctic night settles over Nunalak. Outside, the wind carries the promise of more harsh weather to come, but inside, surrounded by the tools and technologies that have carried your people through decades of climate crisis, you rest easy, knowing that tomorrow will bring new challenges and new opportunities to demonstrate the remarkable adaptability that defines human survival at its finest. Your success echoes across centuries, whispering to future generations that no matter how difficult the world becomes, human beings can find ways to not just endure, but flourish. Wind down. The fire in your oil lamp flickers one last time before settling into a steady, warm glow. Outside your sod house, the Arctic wind continues its ancient song, but it no longer sounds threatening, just familiar, like the breathing of a world you've learned to call home. Your people sleep peacefully around you, warm and well fed, despite living through one of the harshest climate periods in human history. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, but tonight surrounded by the tools and wisdom that have carried your community through centuries of adaptation, you can rest knowing that human ingenuity has once again triumphed over an indifferent universe. The permafrost beneath your feet holds its secrets, close preserving every detail of your remarkable story for future generations who will marvel at what people can accomplish when survival demands nothing less than perfection. Your legacy isn't just in the artifacts you've left behind, but in the proof you've provided that no matter how harsh the world becomes, human beings possess the creativity, resilience, and stubborn determination to not just survive, but to build something beautiful in the process. Sleep now knowing that your story will echo across the centuries, offering hope and guidance to anyone who faces their own impossible challenges. The Little Ice Age tested your ancestors and found them worthy. Whatever storms the future may bring, the human spirit you've demonstrated will light the way forward, one carefully tended flame at a time. Rest easy, survivor. You've earned it.